I wouldn't say it's overlooked, but it's definitely good to remind ourselves as birders that the sound is like one of the best ways to detect a bird's presence, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, when you get out, let's say you're going somewhere in the morning and you get out and new birders, I think, are often amazed at that because I was at looking at birders who are experienced. And you get out of the car and you've got 18 species, bam, already.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just like within 30 seconds of being in the soundscape. You haven't seen a thing yet. and and an audio recording is just that. And so I was often, yeah, exactly. And actually, I found a lot of because I've become so much better, of course, over the last few years at sort of at working with my sounds also. And so I was recording, let's say, a cuckoo species in India, and I had this recording that's an hour and like a couple of minutes, and in those couple of minutes, there's 15 other species that I've called that I had no idea were there. You know,
Wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so I could actually go back and make these lists from those audio recordings.
Hello, everyone, and welcome along back to the Birding Today podcast. Fabulous to have you with us. As always, thank you for tuning in. Your listenership and viewership, if you're watching on YouTube, is much appreciated. Just a couple of words before we get into the episode, as always. Firstly, some of you might have noticed that my YouTube channel has recently passed the 1,000 subscriber mark, which is great. So if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, please do so. That's a great way to spread the word about the podcast and my videos generally that some of you are aware of. So I'll put the link in the show notes. So please subscribe to that if you can. Secondly, if you wanted to support the show, I am just reminding you that you can do so. I've got a couple of options for that now. So you can either do it on Patreon, either $3 a month, $6 a month, or $10 a month, just for supporting the show, and that helps with hosting fees and distribution fees and all of that. Or I've also released a payment plan on Buzzsprout, which I'll also link down below, which you can do the same sort of thing, a monthly payment, if you are so inclined, and if you enjoy the show, and if you want to help me out, that'd be lovely. But regardless, I really appreciate all the good feedback I've been getting from listeners, ever since the show started. And I appreciate all the YouTube comments as well that I've been getting, and direct emails as well. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so at birdingtoday@gmail.com. And I might start doing listener shout-outs again, like I used to. So if you do want to shout out in the next episode, definitely drop me a line. And I'll read out your email or whatever you want me to read out within reason in the next episode. So let's jump into today's episode. It was fabulous. Hope you enjoy. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Birding Today podcast, where birders come together to discuss the joy of birding. I'm your host, Thomas Doerig. Today's guest hails from India, where he had resided all his life until he moved to Tasmania in 2018. While he is interested in all things related to the natural world, vertebrates seem to eclipse other forms, more often than not, especially if the subject makes a sound that he can record. He is passionate about birding, sound recording, and eBird. In the past, he has worked on projects involving bird monitoring and public engagement, and today he works as a bird guide and engages in bird surveys of various kinds. So, please welcome Ramit Singal on the show. How are you, Ramit?
I'm really good, Thomas. Thanks for having me once again. Yeah.
No problem,
Really
no
looking forward
problem.
to it.
Yeah, me too. And as I was saying to you before we hit record, this is going to be a special episode because it focuses on an aspect of birding that I think I haven't touched on a lot on the show, which is audio recording.
Yeah.
So
I'm surprised it's taken you this long to get it. It's actually it's funny how integral sound is to our bird watching experience, and how often I do not come across other sound recordists in a
yeah,
way, it's always a bit surprising to me. But it's growing slowly,
yeah.
at least I can tell. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we'll get into this later in the episode, but What comes to my mind is that, I guess quite a lot of birders do have an aspect of that to their birding, but they just use their phones maybe to record a sound, or
Yeah.
something a bit more basic than the equipment that you use, I imagine.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, as you know, the show centers on the joy of birding. So, what is it about birding that brings you joy?
Yeah, this is a question. Every time I listen to that question on one of your podcasts, I think there's not a single answer that doesn't resonate with me. So this is, I think you gave out a list of questions earlier on, and this is the one I think I put most thought in. Like this is everything about them, and what gives me joy seems. So I've been birding for about a couple of decades now,
Yeah,
um, and I think what's given me joy out of it has changed over time and keeps changing fairly rapidly sometimes. Sometimes I get stuck on one aspect of it for a very long time. Um, but but I think at the heart of it is that birds are just so accessible. Wherever you are, they've always. So when I grew up, for example, I used to be all about mammals. Like I grew up wanting to see tigers, elephants, and watching documentaries on Nat Geo and stuff about African savannas and jaguars and things like that. And but I grew up in Delhi, a really, really urbanized environment.
yeah,
And the easiest access was things like ants and butterflies. And I think as a kid, I was really into those, like watching a lot of insects and stuff. And eventually just birds, because no matter where you were, you always also saw birds. And I think they just invoked a bit more empathy as compared to maybe invertebrates. And I think that continues to date.
yeah,
Looking out the window, just watching a sparrow or a blackbird is as intriguing as sometimes just watching and a rarity, being on a high about seeing like a mega or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
and just I think just watching birds fly, a big flock of just ducks, any species really,
yeah,
just I think watching them, could be driving, could be in an office with a window in it, or just out there.
yeah.
I think just the constant presence of birds and just allowing me to sort of break the monotony of life and look at them and just focus on them for a while and derive joy from that is pretty beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I agree on all of that, and it's something you said as well, that they're accessible and to everyone, and they're so visible. They're like they're like the ambassadors of the natural world wherever we
Yeah.
are. They come into our lives from anywhere. Like in as you said, when you're driving or in your office, you look out the window. And I want to go back on a word that you used, empathy. You think birds generate empathy in us. What do you mean by that exactly?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think so. Um, it's funny, and I'm sure we'll touch on it at some point. Um, like growing up in a tropical country, like you're surrounded by all sorts of creatures
Uh-huh.
all the time. Like and in Tassie, it's just pretty cold for like a lot of that stuff. I think to be in and around your house all the time. Like like if in at home growing up, if you left out like food for over 20 minutes, ants and things would be on it.
Yeah.
And in Tassie here, you could leave it out for months and nothing would get to it, for example, on the
Wow.
kitchen counter.
Yeah.
And I think so. I used to love watching ants. For example, I think they're probably my earliest memories of watching a non-human life
Yeah.
form was probably like ants and beetles. And because my mom was really like, don't leave things.
Yeah.
It was so ingrained, like just don't leave things outside.
Yeah.
And I think with birds, um, as a replacement for my earlier passion for mammals, I think were the first things like that exhibit similar emotions to humans, I suppose, is what I mean by empathy. And you can tell like when it's fearful, when it's being friendly, And I think adjectives that I would otherwise be uh, very cautious about applying to other life forms.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I cannot tell when a snake is happy or not.
Hmm.
But there's a part of me that, you can look at a bird in a bird bath and just you can and sometimes you watch eagles just doing things and they're just doing it for fun.
Yes.
You don't have like a biological definition to what they're doing, so to say, and or go too deep into science to explain what they're doing. They just look like they're like you and I in the sense of
Yeah.
just having a good time, just being out there. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And also what comes to my mind is when you see cockatoos playing around on,
Oh,
branches or wires or hanging upside down
that's
from.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So they exhibit emotions for sure. And I wonder if there's any scientific research that's been done on, bird psychology or bird emotional tendency. Do you know anything about that?
I'm sure I've read and listened to podcasts about it.
Yeah.
But blimey, I can't think of anything off the top of my head to sort of point someone in that direction. I think one of Noah Stricker's books, I think The Thing About Birds,
Mm.
I think, pointed to a lot of that, like parrots dancing and things like that. Like understanding music, for example, and it's funny you mentioned the parrots hanging upside down, because I think it's one of the images I had when coming to Australia. I think when it first rained and I saw gullas just hanging upside down on wires and just opening their wings and just going round and round on that thing. Yeah, that was just fantastic. And I'm pretty sure that's nothing but just having a good time.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and I wonder what's the point of it? Why did they evolve why did they evolve a tendency to playfulness? It must have a use,
Yeah.
biologically. But I don't know.
You
Maybe
know.
it's for bonding. They do it together sometimes, or they're just maybe to entertain themselves. It's so interesting, and it's a good point. And so you're initially into mammals and other life forms. What do you remember if there was a moment or a specific bird species that really got your attention?
Yeah. Um, I'm sure there must have been.
Yeah,
I can't quite actually point it out. It was in when I was in fifth grade in the year 2000, and we moved to a different apartment that had a bigger balcony and a tree just outside.
yeah,
And I remember the first bird I noticed. Like I'd always seen pigeons and doves nesting in the house, for example. But the first birder's bird, so to say, that not everyone can just point out and be like, "Oh yeah, that's a pigeon or a sparrow."
yeah, yeah,
Was there's this? It's a bird called an Indian robin, which is different to the robins as we call them here.
yeah.
And it cocks its tail and moves around. And that was on the balcony. And I think that was the first bird I remember thinking about. I was like, what is that thing? And my dad got me a bird book about the same time. And it, it, it definitely ignited a bit more interest towards at least identifying
Yeah.
things.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think growing up, sound. To give you an example, there's a bird called a coppersmith barbet. It goes
Yes.
like a coppersmith working away, and it's or a quail, of course, everyone knows. And I think the sounds of these birds are absolutely etched in my memory. And I was in, so I was in. We moved to Sydney actually for about 6 months
Yeah.
in the year 2000, completely unrelated to why I'm in Australia now. But and at that time, I was going through a particular phase of just being really into primates and things. And so we were in Sydney in Parramatta, in this hospital. This is complex, and there was a creek line with huge eucalypts around it. And I think I was just out and about on a cycle or something, and I heard a kookaburra call for the first time, and I had no idea what that was. And um, I thought it was an escaped ape from Taronga Zoo or something.
No, no, you didn't. Really?
Yeah, I did, and I just spent so many days looking for it before nailing down like a kookaburra making that call
Yeah.
and being so fascinated by it. And I actually, that time in Sydney, those 6 months was just so formative in my sort of appreciation for birds, like seeing this black and white crow-like thing, which turns out to be an Australian magpie, or rainbow lorikeets, like just such colorful parrots, and I think that probably, quite possibly, actually really got me into looking at birds. Also,
Yeah.
because Australian birds are so friendly, um, compared to a lot of birds elsewhere. I remember wood ducks and magpies swooping at you. Like wood ducks would chase, they had chicks all around the playground, and they would chase anything and everyone. And yeah, like just that kind of interaction with birds was something I wasn't used to in India. Like in India, you would go up to a bird, would fly away, and over here, birds would sort of get back at you.
Wow.
and,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Interesting.
I think that was definitely where it all, maybe possibly, like definitely solidified a lot of
Yeah.
it then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And often that's the case, isn't it? When it's very gradual. When you develop an interest in something new,
Yeah.
it often takes some time, and there's not a pinpoint moment. Sometimes that's the case, but a lot of the times it's not. I wanted to get into that actually. The differences. I always love to talk about birding in different places, globally speaking. So what are some differences that you can think of between birding here in Australia and in India? What are the main differences? Would you say?
Yeah, there's plenty, I think. So I can't speak for all of Australia. Actually, uh, I've maybe done like 2% of my birding outside of Tasmania in Australia. So, and probably Cairns or something around there is the closest I've come to sort of like an Indian
Yeah,
kind of birding. Like there's a lot of birds,
yeah,
basically. And yeah, but in Tasmania, I can probably speak more broadly for between Tassie and India. And I think the one thing that definitely strikes you is the general sort of uh, uh, lack of diversity in a way.
uh-huh.
I think being in a temperate region, on the southern end of the world, with nothing beyond it but Antarctica, um, I think that definitely strikes you when you first move from India to here. But I think in a deeper way, especially when it comes to birding here, in India, we um, birding was so seasonal. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it's there's this one whole like the monsoon, like 3 months of a year where it just rains heavily, and birding's really tough. But it's when all the frogs and snakes come out. So almost everyone switches their attention to like herping and
yeah,
and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um, or and in the winter is when you expect all these pelagic migrants to arrive, and almost 20% to 30% of the birds could be migrants. Um, and in Tassie, like, or in Australia in general, I'm really intrigued by all these nomadic dispersals, but within the country, as opposed to necessarily, you know, um, a lot of birds from different countries coming in, or at least in Tassie, especially. Like you wait for cuckoos coming in from the mainland, and there'll be the odd shorebird here and there, but a lot of the birds are very sedentary. Um, I think, and so I think the other thing that probably derives from that in Tassie is I've become a twitcher here that I definitely wasn't in India.
uh-huh.
In India, there's a lot of the birding in India also sort of tends to be a very patch-based birding. If my neighboring LGA, for example, had a vagrant show up, it would be an alert to birders in my LGA to look out for that vagrant in our LGA so we can add it to the LGA list.
Yes, yeah. So you
As
have
opposed to all of us
LGAs.
going to that LGA
Yeah.
and
So you
picking
have
that
you.
bird
It's the
up.
same. It's the same thing. Like, are they still called LGAs over there, or is it like
Um, I mean,
districts or?
it's yeah, districts.
Yeah,
Districts is the official term.
yeah, yeah,
Some people call them counties because of eBird, of course,
yeah, yeah, for
borrowing
sure.
the American term.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's also I think I found birding alone's more of a thing in Australia. And I'm not sure why that is. I think maybe in India there's probably a factor of safety involved, perhaps.
Oh, really?
Um, possibly in India. I think maybe I've never looked into it, but I used to bird. I think probably alone as much as I do here. But there's most places in India would have a little bird group, and they'd go out for walks almost every Sunday. Sunday mornings are reserved for group birding in most places in India.
Yeah.
And if you're out birding by yourself, so I mean that's almost unheard of, you know. So
Wow.
it's and so you'll see a lot of like big groups, and I'm talking like in Delhi, for example, there's this thing called Delhi Bird Club, and every birder, like, and you're talking groups of up to 60 people at times
Yeah.
would
Wow.
go birding together.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't always be necessarily just about the birds. Like it comes with everything, like lots of food and lots of, you know, just general conversations and things. I think it's centered around birding, but it was definitely a lot more social.
Yeah.
um in Tassie, conversely, like I find you get to socialize, or that form of birding comes alive only when you're either twitching, like a vagrant will bring everyone together, or pelagics, of course,
Yes.
is when I get to meet other birders at all.
So
Yeah,
interesting. That's really
yeah.
interesting. The social aspect of birding, and as you know, I like to talk about that, about the difference between when you're birding alone and birding with a group. Which do you prefer?
Huh. Um, I think because of my tendency for recording bird sounds, but group birding is possibly the single worst thing that can happen to sort of a sound recordist.
Yeah.
Um, I do prefer birding alone for that reason.
Yeah.
But in saying that, like, everything I've learned as a birder has been thanks to birding in groups, and from others around me. Like even my affinity for sounds, you know, comes from watching, comes from like just birders are such generous people in general, you know, like they're happy to share knowledge and stuff. And those formative years in India, just going out with a Delhi bird group, or you go to any city and they'll have a bird group, and you know, you go out with them on a Sunday morning or something, and a lot of what I learned has come from them. So I think a good mix is important.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I think uh, also, and you know, likewise, sharing what you know, sharing observations and things, and it's such a small community, really.
Mm.
You know, there's
Yeah.
maybe outside of the UK and the US, you know, there's only a small percentage of people who are really birders.
Yeah. Oh, that was going to be a question that I had for you. Is it popular in India? Is birding as popular in India as it is here, or as unpopular, you could say?
I think in a proportion of population, definitely,
Mm.
maybe there's probably more birding happening here.
Right.
But there's a lot of birders. It's a big population, people. There's a lot of people,
Yeah.
and slowly, like you'd be hard pressed to go anywhere and not find a birder.
Yes. Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a change I've seen growing up in India. It's you know, like I mentioned, like the Delhi bird group, like there'll be one group of 50 people. Now there might be 4 or 5 different weekend groups
Wow.
going to different areas,
Yeah.
each with their own 20 to 50 people.
Yes.
You know, and
That's that's wonderful. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, it's definitely become very, very popular. I think
Hmm.
the advent of bird photography and social media has definitely played a big role, as has
Yeah.
eBird, I
Y-
think. And
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
let's talk about that now, like eBird
yeah,
and your move. You since because so how many years has it been that you're in Tasmania? 5 or 6 years now.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Just over
So
5.
how is Tasmanian birding special, and and how have you used eBird to explore Tasmanian birding? Because I know there's a few Tasmanian birders that listen to the show, which is cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I've never been to Tasmania. Still, I'd love to go down
Oh
and
yeah, you should
get all
visit.
the endemics.
Yeah, yeah. um, yeah, there's well, yeah, it's well, for one, there's the endemics in
Yeah,
Tassie,
yeah, yeah,
and um, when I first moved here, I was just uh, I mean, Tasmanian birding, I think again, it's the friendliness of birds. My wife often recalls when I my first day in Tasmania, we were walking down the mall. I live in a place called Devonport, and
Yeah.
we're just walking down the mall, and um, I put my hand. I saw a bird, and I put my hand out in front of her. I stop. Oh my God, there's a silver gull just in front of me. And I think one of the things that often strikes me is just again how amazing birds are here. Just you find these groups of birds, and I guess it would have been the same. It's probably the same for birders going to any new country, and you see this new bird just being so friendly and so out there.
Yes.
Uh, but I think Tasmanian birds, birding in Tasmania is there's very few truly difficult species, and so it's just really nice in as to how intimate the experience can be in terms
Yeah.
of your relationship with some of the birds.
Yeah.
It's also a really small state, so you have, of course, all the endemics, most of which are remarkably widespread. I think that also surprised me. I mean, I guess when you think about endemics, you often think about range restrictions and species that are sort of, just found only in this place and nowhere else. But a lot of Tasmanian endemics seem to be generalists almost. Like you'll see
Okay.
them in suburbs, but also in bush,
Yeah.
in dry woodland, in rainforest, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of other species which are very restricted. Like you can, to bring off the top of my head, things like tawny crown honeyeaters or ground parrots and things. And the state's big enough to have enough diversity, but small enough that you can get anywhere in a day
Wow.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and sort of see what you want to see or have a crack at birding anywhere. And
Yes. I guess the exception is the southwest wilderness part. That's as
yeah,
I understand it, that's really remote, right? The
yeah, that's
southwest
probably the
Tasmanian.
only. Yeah, I mean, technically, you could still do a day trip. Like you can just take a flight down, and like it's an hour from Hobart. You go down, and you come back. It just costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, pelagics. Like in oh, I reckon, having only experienced pelagics in India and off of Eaglehawk Neck here, but I still think, like, because of my involvement with eBird in the past and looking at lists from elsewhere, I reckon on a good day, the Eaglehawk Neck pelagic is possibly the best in the world.
Wow.
And I think it's just, I think, coming from India, where the seas were always calm, and you would see, maybe on a good day, you see 4 or 5 truly, not even that, maybe 3 truly pelagic species.
Yeah. Wow.
To often in off of Eaglehawk Neck, you could, at the end of the day, you could be like, oh, that wasn't anything special, and then you look at your species list, and you're still seeing 25 different species, including like 8 species of albatross,
Yeah.
and you get so spoiled, for just
Yeah.
for just how diverse that group of birds is, and the magic of just being out there, and you can expect anything. I think the pelagics have definitely been a game changer for me, having
Yeah.
come here.
Okay.
Um,
While we're on that, can I ask you what are, I have no idea what are pelagics like in from India? Is I guess the difference is the continental shelf is a bit farther out or much farther out.
yeah,
That
yeah.
must
I
be
don't
it, right?
think I
Yeah.
don't think I've ever managed to actually get out of the continental shelf in India.
Wow.
Like you have massive day trips that start at 7 a.m. and at 6 p.m. And I don't think I've ever actually managed to get out
Wow.
to the shelf edge.
Yeah.
Um,
And the waters are much warmer too, aren't they?
yeah, yeah. What is it really for? And
Yeah.
so you normally, in India, you would charter like a fishing boat,
Yeah.
but they tend to be like these big old boats. There's you can we have like, I think you normally have 30 to 40 birders on there, so
Okay.
they're pretty big by at
Yeah.
least standards here.
Yeah.
And you go out and you just keep an eye out. There's no chumming. You don't do any burling or anything.
Really?
Just keep an eye out for birds.
Why not? Why don't they do any chumming?
Why don't we do it? No idea. Actually, I have no idea. I
Yeah.
didn't even know it was a thing until I got here.
Yeah. Okay.
And possibly just something birders in India haven't quite discovered yet. I know on one trip in India, we did take out fish oil,
Yeah.
um, and we just dropped some out of the boat, and those were the best views I ever had of Wilson storm petrels coming in. But those were the only birds that came in. Nothing else even came in. So
Maybe it's something to do with there's not as much wind, or it's
yeah,
warmer, so it's not as potent, the smell, something like that. It's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And I'm not really sure how many things would probably follow boats. You have a lot of gulls and terns,
Yeah,
but they hang around anyway.
yeah,
You get the odd Persian shearwater or a booby or a tropic bird, but
yeah,
really
yeah.
that's really about it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Tropic
the
birds are
best.
cool though. No,
They are.
wow.
They're amazing. Oh, all of them birds are cool. It's just that you don't get as many.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Birding Today podcast. It's great to have you with us. If you're enjoying the show, don't hesitate to leave a positive review on whichever podcast app you're using at the moment. This really helps with getting the podcast up in search results and reaching more people. Thank you, and back to the show. Hey, let's move towards the main topic, Ramit, of this episode, which I'm really interested to get into. So, recording bird sounds. So this is a huge part of birding because, it's, as you said before, you alluded to the importance of, bird song and the calls and being familiar with the calls. So when did you first start recording bird sounds? And I think that you also like to record sounds of nature generally, right? When did you first get into the recording thing?
um, I think yeah. So I reckon I got a camera for the first time in about 2008.
Yeah.
Like one of the super zoom cameras, and of course until then I didn't really have a smartphone to record anything with. So that camera was the first time I started taking videos
Yeah.
actually, and
Okay. Yeah.
and sort of had around also that time is when sort of the internet started playing a big role in how we bird, in
Yeah.
the sense there were resources available online. And I discovered Xenocanto maybe around the same time. And it also coincided with me moving out of Delhi for uni. And so I moved from North India, which is where Delhi is, to the southwest coast of India for uni, and which is very tropical. Again, things similar to Cairns,
Okay.
very, very humid.
Yeah.
Lots of birds that skulk, and you mostly hear,
Skulkers. Skulkers.
you hear a lot more than you see,
Yeah.
and there wasn't much there in the way of other birders at the time, and I just started recording and taking videos of everything I could, and learned how to extract the sound and putting it up on Xenocanto.
Yeah, that's exactly
And
what. Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah,
That's I've done that. So
yeah,
almost all my eBird audio recordings have actually been extracted from video footage that I've taken, and
yeah,
that's quite a good way to do it because usually video cameras these days especially have moderately good audio recording capacity. So
absolutely,
so
absolutely.
all you have to do, I went onto some website and I typed into Google extract audio from video, and all you have to do is upload your video file, and then you can download the audio track of the video.
That's
And
right.
that's what I did and I love doing that. And then I love seeing the is it called a spectrogram of
Yep.
of the audio, because then that's sort of a visual representation of the sound, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
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 so
yeah.
it's awesome. Tell me more about it. Tell me
Yeah,
more.
yeah, no, absolutely, and that's exactly how I started. And actually, you're right. It's funny, but even now, I think some of the quality of recordings from the cameras, I think, because I think they have a mic that's it's so there's an omnidirectional mic which sort of takes in all the sounds around you, which is what most of our phones will have.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be speaking into the speaker to make your sound nice and clear, which is often not really good for birds because you want the mic to be pointing at the bird, which is what the mics in cameras tend to be.
Right.
And so some of the sound recordings from 2009 and 10 that I have are actually fantastic. And anyway, so yeah, I got into that. and actually, so yes, Xenocanto, of course, generates a spectrogram, and not all of it, but some of it, and he's just I think so. I mean, of course, so I think it just struck me around that time. Just the importance of IDing birds by call. Um, and with the video, I think what was really useful, and I think you mentioned this in your previous podcast, is you could often see the bird making the call, and so you're able to relate what's going on, and you can associate the call with the ID of the bird or what the bird is doing, um, and so I mean, one of the things you do with a mic, for example, is you often take extensive notes after recording. It's sort of
Yeah.
like,
Okay.
oh, this is a recording of an XYZ as it was sitting on a perch on top, calling
Yes.
out,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. But with a video, you
So
don't necessarily.
you speak into the mic after you've recorded. You say and the date and the time and the weather and any details
That's
like
right.
that. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But with the video, I didn't need to do that because it was all on video. And,
Yes.
and actually, a lot of the time, well, during the pandemic, with the first couple of lockdowns, I just spent going back to those videos and extracting them and putting them back up into Macaulay library on eBird, like creating eBird lists out of these old video files I had,
Yeah.
and I was surprised at how much I was able to glean off of what was actually happening in front of me because it was all on video,
Yes.
and
Interesting.
add those notes into the eBird lists.
So they were historical artifacts of sound.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that leads me to say that sound is actually it's such an important way to detect the presence of species, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's I
Yeah.
wouldn't say it's overlooked, but it's definitely good to remind ourselves as birders that sound is like one of the best ways to detect a bird's presence, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look. I mean, when you get out, let's say you're going somewhere in the morning, and you get out, and new birders, I think, are often amazed at that because I was at looking at birders who are experienced, and you get out of the car and you've got 18 species, bam, already,
Yeah.
right? And that's just like within 30 seconds of being in the soundscape. You haven't seen a thing yet, and an audio recording is just that. And so I was often, yeah, exactly. And actually, I found a lot of because I've become so much better, of course, over the last few years at sort of at working with my sounds also, and so I was recording, let's say, a cuckoo species in India, and I had this recording that's an hour, like a couple of minutes, and in those couple of minutes, there's 15 other species that I've called that I had no idea were there.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I could actually go back and make these lists from those audio recordings
It's
and
incredible.
things.
Yeah. I think researchers do this, especially I would say in closed habitats like tropical rainforest, is to leave a microphone, for 2, 3, 4, or even up to 10 hours.
Oh yeah,
Leave it recording, either during the day or at night for the nocturnal species,
that's right. That's
and
right.
then sit at the computer and listen to it for 10 hours and note every time you hear a new species, note it down,
Absolutely.
the time. That's so cool. That's such a great way to monitor and survey an area, is to leave a microphone out.
Oh, absolutely.
So
I
good.
mean,
So good.
yeah, and I guess that's probably one of the. Uh, I mean, again, it was still pretty. I'm not sure about elsewhere, but in India, that was pretty new at the time. But of course, now acoustic monitoring is just such a standard method used by researchers everywhere
Yeah.
to detect drops in diversity. Diversity in itself drops in diversity. Difficult species that often only get detected by sound. It's like the camera trap of the audio world, so to
Right.
say. You can just leave a recorder out there for years at times, and just see how things are changing around you.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Uh,
Is there much of that in Australia in ornithology research?
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. I think there's actually quite a bit that happens in Australia with bioacoustics.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not aware of the specific details, but I do know lots of people who work in it
Hmm.
and who've been in touch with my recordings and things, and
Yeah.
so I'm sure there's a lot that actually happens.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Cool. And I wanted to just go back as well. For those of you watching and listening, Xenocanto is that's so it's XENO Canto.
That's right.
That's a website that is it only for bird sounds or is it for birds
Yeah,
and other animals?
it's only bird sounds.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
But I think it's by far the largest database
Yeah, yeah,
of bird
yeah.
sounds there is. Yeah.
Followed, I would imagine, by Macaulay at this point, by eBird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's a few differences between the two. We could touch upon them if you like.
Please do. Yes.
um, I think Xenocanto's uh, so Macaulay is more I think so Macaulay of course now has been linked to eBird and I think
Yes.
slowly expanding.
Mm.
Earlier you could anybody could have gone to Xenocanto, put a sound there. With Macaulay Library, there's an archiving process. So you submit a sound, somebody archives it for you.
Right.
At the like an actual person
Right.
is there at the back end who goes through the sound and archives it until eBird allowed sound recordings. And now anybody can, using eBird, put a sound recording into Macaulay Library.
Yes.
Um,
What about the ID of the sound? Does someone because I spoke about iNaturalist with James Bennett in the last episode,
yeah,
and I like how that works because it's a community consensus about an
that's
ID,
right. Yeah, yeah,
which is really cool. I really like that.
absolutely.
So is that how Xenocanto works?
Yeah, so Xenocanto has a community aspect to it in
Yeah.
terms of people can raise questions. You can just congratulate someone on a recording. You
Hmm.
can tell them, hey, I think there's also this calling here, and you can add species in the background and things like that.
Right.
Macaulay doesn't necessarily allow community participation thing to it. In saying that, like I started off with Xenocanto until eBird allowed sound recordings, and it just the eBird thing just fits into my workflow because I'm making a list anyway, and I really struggle to put recordings onto Xenocanto now because it has to go on a file by file basis as opposed to a checklist
Yeah.
based thing with
Yeah.
Macaulay. I think, and if you care, and I deep, it's one of the things that really interests me, and one of the reasons I've often sort of cursed myself for not using Xenocanto as often as I should. Xenocanto um, allows you to license your recordings the way you want to. So I'm really big into sort of open source material, and so I would love it if my recordings were free to use for anyone.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Xenocanto allows me to sort of license my recordings as such, but Macaulay doesn't at the
Right.
moment.
Because they
So
take ownership of it in a way.
that's right. So
Yeah.
it's owned by you and Macaulay
Yes.
the moment you put it into eBird. So I think
Yeah.
there's a key difference there. If you care about that philosophically, I do like to think I care, but I obviously haven't cared enough for to necessarily always make time for Xenocanto in my
Yeah.
workflow.
Yeah.
But yeah,
For sure. That's so interesting. I love talking about all this. Let's go deeper into it. So let's go into this. So how does audio recording differ from photography or videography? And obviously the visual aspect is the main difference, but
yeah.
when you're in the field, what do you do differently?
Um, that's a really good question. And the more I think of, I actually, so when I know it was part of the thing you sent me as an outline, and initially, the first thing that screams at you, of course, for videography or for photography, you need to be able to see the bird,
Aha.
and sound recording takes that out of the picture, quite literally, because there isn't one. But
Yeah.
as long as you can hone in on where the sound is coming from, and you get better at it with time. So I could quickly just show you. It happens to be here. I
Yeah.
use something like this. That's the
Wow.
parabola. So for somebody for the listeners who can't see this on video, it's like a big plastic dish with a hole through which a mic comes, and that mic captures the sound. And that's the mic, and that goes in over here, and all this. So you have to point this directly at the bird, and it's able to amplify the sound of the bird.
Yes.
But I don't have to see the bird to be able to point a mic at it, and so I think that's a key difference,
Okay.
really. And
Okay.
I can go to a place, never see my subject,
Yeah.
and still get fantastic sound recordings.
That's incredible, and it's almost I think I've seen it's almost like a gun that you're using it like
That's right.
pointing
That's
it
right.
exactly where you can. And do you have headphones on while you're doing that?
I used to. I
Mm-hmm.
used to, and so actually headphones were a key aspect of it initially because using headphones you can listen to what you're recording,
Yeah.
and so if you're off sometimes, imagine a tiny passerine like a thornbill or something singing, and actually, you know what? One of the things that really, sorry to just quickly digress, but one of the things that really blew my mind away with a lot of Australian birds compared to a lot of birds in the northern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, they all sing in spring, and they'll often sit at a perch and sing away for hours at a time from the same place,
Yeah.
right? A lot of Australian birds seem to move when they sing.
Yeah.
It just like it made sound recording so hard because in India I could often dial down, like I could follow a thrush. And for those of you who might have blackbirds, like I know in Tasmanian everybody has a blackbird in their backyard pretty much.
Mm.
It sings from the exact same spot.
Uh-huh.
So to get it singing, I don't even have to record it today. If it's singing, I know it'll come back to the exact perch tomorrow. And as long as I've positioned myself in the right way, I can get fantastic sound recording for the next day. But let's say I was trying to record um, a brown thornbill singing. It moves constantly, and it may be singing from a different bush one day to a different bush the next day. And
Yes.
so all of that sort of honing in on a single perch where the bird sings from kind of goes out the window. And so you end up so I think I found myself following the bird and trying to get a good visual of it a lot more here.
Yeah. Wow. That's so
Then
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Now that you mention it, it's and all the honey eaters as well. They're so mobile.
absolutely. And
It's
and 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 the songs are often interspersed with calls. And with honey eaters, sometimes you can't even tell what a song is when a song's a song, when a call's a call. I mean, there's no obvious demarcation as there often is with a lot of the birds in the northern hemisphere.
yeah. 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 What's the difference between a song and a call?
But I mean, you would think. I think the most basic definition would be a song's what a bird uses is what a bird would use for advertising. Traditionally, of course, you would think a male bird is the one that sings, but we now know that females birds sing, but for various different reasons as well. But you go to a place, and again, I'll use the example of greenfinches, goldfinches, blackbirds, because I think a lot of Australian birders, even if you haven't been outside of Australia, but if you've been in, let's say, Victoria,
Mm-hmm.
Tassie,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be at least familiar with these birds.
Yeah.
Um, you know, particular times of the years, maybe about a 3 month, 4 month window, they're always singing,
Mm.
and you barely hear them. You hear the same song. You hear what sounds the same, and their calls are like contact calls, and you can tell what they're doing with that, and it's almost always it's just very well demarcated. I don't know how else to put it. Like you
Yes,
can
it's
just
it's
tell
it's
when
very
a song is a
distinguished.
song.
It's very distinguished. Yeah, and also as a small digression as well, is it's very nice to hear those European birds as because I come from Europe and even though I've been in Australia for a long time, I still have that sonic memory of European birds. And when I
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
a blackbird or a greenfinch in Australia, it's like taste of home.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Um,
can. It's probably how the European settlers when they came in probably felt. Um, but yeah, no, exactly. And I think with a lot of there's obviously exceptions. So like the Bassian thrush is an exception. The cuckoos are an exception where there's an obvious call,
mm,
a song like where they're advertising.
yes.
Um, but with a lot of other birds, um, with something like a super fairy wren, I say another common bird, and another other fairy wrens too. There's obviously the long kind of trilling, chirping thing, the buzzy thing that a male does from time
Yes.
to time,
Yeah.
which also a female can do, it seems, and brown birds can do, which could be males or females, you can't tell. Um, interspersed with other complex bits of vocalizations
Yeah.
that sort of, at least in a standard that demarcated, distinguished kind of way, would fit call or song and you can't
Yeah.
always tell.
Yeah,
and,
because I used
and
to on my eBird audios that
yeah,
I used to put up. I never used to really know song or call. For some of these
yeah,
birds,
yeah,
like it's really hard to
yeah.
say. I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
anyway, so yeah, I find, I think Australian birds, again, that's probably one of the differences between birding in India and here
Uh huh.
as well, is that like this Australian birds have such interesting complexities about them,
Yes.
that don't apply to the birds in the northern hemisphere the same way
Yeah, for
they
sure.
do. Yeah,
I
yeah,
a relevant book to this conversation to an extent is, I don't know if you've read it, is I think it's called Where Song Began by.
yeah. By Tim Lowe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
great book. That's such a great book, and it's all
It
about that.
is. It is.
And the soundscape of Australian birds is so varied. But like I always, whenever I think of the soundscape of Australian birding, it's so loud.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It is. I think you think about like how is noisy miner a songbird, and um, and like I haven't once figured out what the song is of a noisy miner. Like it seems to call the same way throughout the year, depending on what it's doing.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
Or the different verses seem to be like it obviously has different calls and different vocalizations, but I can't quite tell what's the song, what's not. It's not giving it out from a perch.
Uh huh.
It's a bit all over the place for me, and I'm still getting to grips with that, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think coming back to how sound recording is different from videography and photography, I think that's a big one here. Is very often like you don't actually have to see the bird, but actually in Australia that might not always be true. You do often have to see, like a hornbill. I always try and get a visual of to get the best recording of, for example, or a
Right.
striated parrot or a spotted parrot. They move around so much when they're singing,
Yeah.
that it's good to get a good visual of.
Yeah.
Um, I do use headphones. I used to use headphones to know what I'm actually recording, but after a while, um, you just get better at it, and you stop. Like you don't have to listen to what you're recording to know that you're getting a good recording. Some of the modern sound recorders have levels on them, so you know when the signal is going high enough and low enough to know what you're recording.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow, that's so brilliant. So cool.
but yeah, and I
Yeah.
think I think again coming back to it, I can go for bird photography with a bunch of other birders and friends, and get cracking shots of things, and I almost always leave my audio recording equipment at home if I'm
Right.
going out with other people, because
Yes.
you just come across as a jerk asking everybody to shut up every single time a bird's making a sound. and,
For
I
sure.
think I'm always trying to figure out how can I get the best recordings from the least amount of equipment so I can carry it when I'm out, just with my partner, or with just friends who are not birders, for example. And
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, I think sound recording is incredibly hard when there's others around you.
And I guess the microphone and the gear that you use to go into the technical aspect of it is important as well, right? That you have to have a really sensitive mic, because so maybe we can delve into that quickly. Is your gear, how far away? And I guess it depends on the volume of the particular bird you're recording. But how
Yeah.
far away does the bird have to be, or how close does the bird have to be for a top quality recording?
Yes. Good question. The closer the better.
Ah,
Um, the closer you are to the source of the signal, the better your sound recording would be in terms of eliminating other environmental sounds.
yeah,
Sometimes I want the environmental aspect of it. Sometimes there's a nice stream in the background and I do want to include it. And you can position yourself such that the stream's there. Or you want a dawn chorus, for example. You want to be as far as possible, maybe, instead of focusing on one bird. So it horses for courses. But also, you don't have to have really good gear. Some of the phones today are just fantastic with how good they're. We've already spoken about cameras with how good the microphone system is built into these things. You can buy like tiny mics that attach to your phones also. Like I think they cost about $50 to $100.
Yeah.
And they just attach to your phone, and they at least I think make general bird sound recordings, like in terms of if you're directing it at a species.
Yeah.
At least give like a 3 to 4 times improvement on what
Wow.
you would from just the phone,
Uh-huh.
for example. And there's and of course the better the gear, the further away you can afford to be. So the parabola I just showed you, the big dish,
Yeah.
pain to carry, but I could be a few hundred meters away from a bird and get the same quality that I would if I was using just my phone. I would probably have to be within 10 meters or less.
Yes. Yes. It's so great. Like you could go out birding without binoculars, without a camera, just with that dish that you showed me. And if anyone's just listening to this podcast, I definitely hop on YouTube and skip to the bit where Ramit was showing the dish. It's so big. It's so big, and you could just go out with that, only with that, and you could probably detect the presence of all the same birds as if you had binoculars.
Yeah. Well,
right?
but it has to be calling. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That blows my mind. That it's brilliant. And because when you are out birding, would you say most of the birds that you see are making some sort of sound?
Yeah, often, and it's surprising. I think one of the things I've become really good at is telling. So one of the things that you get really good at the more you record, is we spoke about spectrograms earlier. So again, so spectrograms is like a visual representation of sound. So like a beep, like an olive whistler doing a beep, comes across as a straight line.
Yeah.
But a beep, so it would be like a straight line, a drop, and then a line going, so diagonally drop, a diagonally going up.
Yes.
So it's an upward whistle or downward whistle, and so on and so forth. And so you can actually, one of the things you can tell is you can read sounds.
Yeah.
And very often as I'm recording them, I'm able to read them, like, because you just look at it so often, like you end up looking at spectrograms all the time.
Yes.
And you're sort of formulating a spectrogram as you go.
Wow.
And so minute differences. So for a complex species group, especially sometimes when they're singing in Tassie, would be probably like brown hornbill and Tasmanian hornbill, but the frequencies they operate at when they're singing are fairly different, and I can often tell when I'm listening by just drawing out the spectrogram which one it would be. Similarly, wing flutters.
Oh yeah.
So you can tell with the way with ducks, for example, chestnut eels have a different wing flutter sound to a Pacific black duck. And
wow.
I mean, these are things I wouldn't probably focus on unless I wasn't listening to the bird all the time as I was recording them.
That's mind blowing. Like distinguishing between Pacific black duck and chestnut teal by the wing flutters. So badass, so cool.
And pigeons and doves probably, like we don't get many here, but you can actually tell between common bronzewing and brush bronzewing by their different flapping sounds.
Wow, really?
Really?
Yeah. Incredible.
And so stuff like that you're able to definitely get in on.
And I want to go back to when you were doing the whistler examples. Is for those ones, when they're very well defined sounds, they come across as a thick, well defined black line on the spectrogram. But when it's a harsh call, like the Victoria's rifle bird up here in Cairns, that's very harsh. So that's more. It appears as a more blurry blob, doesn't it, on the spectrogram? Why is that? Is it because different frequencies are in the one sound?
Occupying the full band of available frequencies. Basically. And so a good example would be something like an airplane. So actually, one of the worst places to go sound recording in is near an airport. and so airplanes occupy the full range of frequency, and you can just hear nothing else. And so Victoria riflebird is a great example, actually. It just occupies the full band of frequency. So you just see this buzzy looking thing occupy the entire spectrogram.
Yeah.
But with a raven, it doesn't sound as harsh as a Victoria's riflebird, but they also occupy the full range of frequency. But when you zoom into the spectrogram, you see the individual lines,
Yes.
which indicates like a nasal quality to that harshness. So it's not harsh, so to say. I would call it more nasal, although and these are differences you start noticing once you start looking at spectrograms. Normally, I think before I started looking at spectrograms, I would describe both sounds as just harsh.
Uh-huh.
And now I would look at a raven and be like, oh, that's a nasal tone versus, and you can do more nasal, less nasal based on what the spectrogram is saying versus a harsh tone for, let's say.
Yes.
For a riflebird.
It's so interesting, and it's so. I would say it is a little bit overlooked. The audio aspect of birding, because the discussions are always centered around cameras, binoculars, telescopes, even.
Yeah.
And I think audio media could be something that birders can take up. Like it's. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I think the. I think one of the things is, I mean, and look, it's again, so I think you mentioned how I'm passionate about eBird. One of the things I love about eBird is it doesn't try and change how you bird. And I'm a big advocate of like bird how you want to. As long as it's fun, keep birding and do what is fun to you. And so if audio, if it's not something that interests you, you don't have to get into it. But in saying that, I think I think we're all attuned to sounds all the time, just not aware of how acutely we can be attuned to them.
Yeah.
And sound recording is one of those ways in which you can definitely build your birding skills. You can build the collective knowledge of our birds, and quite possibly how we had these recognition tools from images and things like Merlin, and Merlin now has a sound ID feature to it.
Mm-hmm.
Relies on people uploading their calls, putting them up on Canto or Macaulay Library and things like that. And even if they're crap quality, doesn't really matter. Because the image of the sound remains the same.
Yes.
Yeah. And all of these machine learning tools can pick up on that and form better tools for new birders, for scientists and researchers all across. So it's definitely an aspect that has more uses than one.
Yeah, and I guess it's the whole algorithm AI side can come into this discussion now. Like when you have loads of recordings of the same species, the system can learn or make an average of all of these same ones, and then it's like iNaturalist again. Like it works with photos. It suggests based on all the thousands of or hundreds of photos of this species that have been confirmed to be the species, this is what it could be.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And exactly. And the more samples there are of that thing, the more accurate it is with the suggestions. And it's similar with sound recording.
For sure. And so there's a few more questions about this audio recording that I had for you. One of which, what are some of your best experiences of recording bird sounds? The most exciting moments?
Yeah. Look, recording bird sounds. I think I'm always extremely chuffed. Just so happy just to get a good recording of anything. But I think especially in Australia, I think one of the things that still gets me each time is how many things mimic other things.
Yes.
So to say. Like, so you could be recording a Silvereye song and suddenly the Silvereye breaks into this golden whistler rendition or a gray shrikefish rendition.
Yeah.
And to be able to capture that, like, just feels like, oh wow, I got it. Like, I've heard this, I've anecdotally like heard about it.
Yeah.
But to actually record it and then be able to sort of again see it on the spectrogram and match it to the whistler song.
Yeah.
Like, yes, that's exactly it.
If you can't see the bird, how do you know that? And I'm being a bit,
Yeah, go for it.
finicky here, but if you can't see that golden whistler, how could you prove that a silver eye wasn't just singing just then, and then the golden whistler was there?
You can,
know?
and I think okay. I think it's a whole other conversation. I think one of the things about sound recordings, one of the things I've learned is, it's and I think it's also through you mentioned how birders don't often focus on audio. Because a lot of birders are listers.
Yeah.
Would you list a bird that's heard only? Would I actually, as somebody who really values audio, let's say, list a bird if it was heard only? I probably wouldn't, because knowing how many things can mimic everything, unless I'm absolutely dead on sure that it's a nightjar or something, that a nightjar wouldn't be mimicking something else. It has these vocal cords that don't allow it to actually diversify and and things. I would always leave room for error.
Right.
With something like a herd only, for example.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Very often with a silver eye, for example, in this case, it was a bird I was looking at and recording. There's been a few, like a strong-billed honeyeater, which I'm not sure if mimicry's been documented or not, but I was recording one, and suddenly, like, I hear, and I actually had my headphones on that day, and I started hearing at almost the same volume a gray butcherbird. I've got my mic pointed exactly at this honeyeater, like 8 meters away from me or something.
Yeah.
There's no butcherbird around, and it's just doing this really complex butcherbird low frequency
wow
thing. And I'm like, wow, that's just insane that it can do that. Similarly, for things like Zoothera thrushes, like Bassian thrushes and stuff, and they have this vocal cord. So they do a song like a, and then they'll do this high pitched and it sounds like two different sounds. And you can, when you hear it and when you record it, it's just magical, because it really does feel like it's not coming from the bird you're recording, like it's coming from somewhere else. I love those experiences.
Yeah.
But I think my favorite, so we have a couple of starlings just nesting on the roof here at home, and once like a couple of years ago also, it started doing a penguin sound.
Really?
Like a really, really good mimicry of a penguin. And like, oh, where did you pick that up? And anyway, so I started putting out a mic on the bins outside, pointing at on the antenna where it would perch and sing from. And I would just come back and, if I had time, I would go through the recording from the microphone over the last 3 hours of this bird that just comes and sings. And I heard banded lapwings.
Wow.
Which is, not a particularly common bird in Tassie. Like, I'm like, oh, a banded lapwing. Where it got that from? Because it's been here all this while. It's only so far it can go. It's building a nest.
Yeah.
And so there's a paddock about 2 streets away from me, and I went there, and sure, right there they were. For about a week, there was like about 5 banded lapwings there.
Yes. Amazing.
It was pretty amazing to just have this starling that picked up a call right there.
Yeah.
Came back, started singing it, and you're like, there's a banded lapwing in my neighborhood.
Yes. So mimicry is a huge. Mimicry is massive, isn't it? In the bird world, and and it's sort of like a double-edged sword, I guess, because as you were saying before, it means that it adds a degree of uncertainty to what's actually making the sound.
Yeah.
Because and so that adds that degree of uncertainty, but it also means that you can, by identifying which bird, for example, let's take the superb lyrebird.
Yeah.
In Sherbrooke Forest in the Dandenong Ranges, it's I've been there loads of times, and it's amazing to hear the different birds that the lyrebirds are mimicking, and that's a way of, I suppose, detecting other species. Because is that fair to say? Because the lyrebird can only mimic if it hears something. Do you know what I'm trying to get at? Like mimicry is a way of IDing what is around if the bird is an accomplished mimic. Right?
Absolutely. And assuming you're sure it's mimicry and not just part of its regular repertoire.
Right.
Also, right? I think I was listening to this somewhere. I've forgotten where now, actually, but. For example, with lyrebirds, the camera shutter sound.
Oh, yeah.
right, seems to be part of the female lyrebird repertoire or something. And so it's
Wow.
actually possibly not mimicking camera shutters.
Wow.
It's it's just part of the repertoire of a female bird. And I think that's another thing that really excites me. And with sound recording is getting those sounds that are, like there's on in field guides. I think one of the examples would be Peter, Peter, Peter for Jackie Winter,
Uh-huh.
let's say, and you have that, and but Jackie Winter does all sorts of different sounds when it's singing, and I think so often I think with field guides, and growing up, for example, with field guides, you had like normally a phrase, right? Like there's a thing called a lesser cuckoo, and the phrase was have your choky pepper, and
Wow. Yeah.
and if it didn't fit that phrase, it wasn't that bird.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not true. Most birds have sounds that are incredibly varied, and
Yeah.
I think I love that aspect of sound recording. That it opens your world to just another aspect of bird watching for you to enjoy. And just that birds are not just that one sound in a field guide, or that one sound that's on your app. That they may make 1,000 different sounds. It's just that one of them seems to be diagnostic for some reason,
Hmm.
versus a lot of the others.
Because
And
they're more common, I guess.
I guess, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Or they're just easier to transcribe or
Uh-huh.
describe, and things,
Yeah.
and I think the more you do, more you record sound, or I think the more you just listen to birds, you realize there's, like sound is such a complex aspect of their lives, and how they use it, and how much they make, and what they make, and how much is possibly within outside of our audible ranges in the first place, and things. So
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so, yeah, it's such a massive part of birds. And let's digress a little bit quickly if you can. What other groups of animals do you record sounds of?
Um, Frogs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I really got into cicadas for a while,
Yeah?
but that didn't last as long, too long. I think I got a bit overwhelmed by them, and didn't know what to do with the recordings either. I really got into so actually my first job out of uni, I studied engineering, by the way, and I got offered a job to work on frogs by a friend who was an ecologist, and this was 2013 or something. And being a birder, and for some reason at that time, like frog calls weren't, at least in India, amongst a lot of Indian herpetologists, they weren't really looked at as things that you could identify frogs with. And I got into the field, started learning about these frogs, and it didn't take too long to figure out every frog has its own call, and that you can just ID them by call.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
And so I got really into recording frog calls then, and we actually ended up like describing new species, like just discovering new species by frog calls,
That's
and things like, yeah,
incredible.
yeah, I found 3 new
Wow.
species just by calls.
Yeah.
And um and it's so frogs definitely are the other things. And I
Yeah.
think lately I've just been getting into a lot of soundscapes, like a lot of the binaural soundscapes. So could be trees moving. Just I love being in one of the things in I love being out. I love about Australia and being out in the bush here is that eucalyptus trees, at least the gum trees, they make all sorts of sounds.
Uh-huh.
And they have different creaks, even melaleuca, like the swamp paperbark and stuff. They have all these different creaks and things, and
Yeah.
I love recording those, for example. And yeah, just anything really.
For sure. For
But I think
sure.
in terms of what really sort of gets me going is birds and frogs. I think
Yeah.
they're the most obvious ones as well.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, yeah. And also I guess I would
yeah,
add to that insects. And but
yeah,
maybe that's because I live in Cairns.
yeah. I
and
know.
and there's so many when you go out at night especially, it's like it's deafening. It's a
Yeah.
deafening sound of just insects. And I'm sure if you were to point your mic anywhere in the forest at night up here in the rainforest, you'd just get a big blur of just insects, it's and
Oh,
crickets.
Absolutely. I think all sorts of katydids and crickets. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They make such amazing sounds, and I used to. I actually did record them for a while. Just didn't last long that
Mm.
phase.
Hmm.
I think it requires being out in the night
Yeah.
too much,
Yeah.
and I think you just get tired.
For
But
sure.
yeah. I think in Tassie we definitely don't have as many. I did try and put out recorders to get thumpings. Like, I mean, I do try from time to time,
Yeah.
especially in the winter when not much else is about. I just put out a recorder for like to record like the thumps of a paddy melon or a wallaby moving around. Uh, I thought I was recording sugar gliders. I mean, Owlet Night Jazz for a long time, and it turns out they were all sugar gliders. So I have a
Wow.
lot of sugar glider recordings,
Yeah. Interesting.
and yeah, just anything really.
Yeah.
I'll
Oh,
often just put out a recorder and walk away and come back a few hours later and see what I've got.
yeah. For I'll quickly put this in. For when you leave a microphone out, I guess it has
Yeah.
to. Is it just battery powered?
Yeah,
I imagine. Yeah.
yeah. So I usually have a battery pack, like the same battery pack you would use for your phone.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I use one of those
Wow.
20,000
Yeah.
mAh ones and milliampere hours ones, and they last me about a couple of days.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah. I guess when to go back to what we were discussing about researchers putting a mic out for hours at a time,
Yeah,
that's only valuable if the expertise is behind it. If you actually know the calls, because it's all well and good to have the audio file and the spectrogram, but you need to know what's making the
yeah,
sounds.
yeah,
Just
yeah. Absolutely,
and that comes down to having the knowledge of the calls, right?
absolutely.
But recording, that's one of the best ways to learn bird calls and bird songs is by
Yeah,
recording them, right?
it really works for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when I record a sound, I always remember it. It's
Mm.
like when you I guess when you photograph a bird,
Hmm.
it sticks in your memory a lot more than when you don't.
Yeah.
you know, you're able to go back to it
Yeah.
and look at it and find new features and so I'm able to sort of record a bird and listen to it again and again. And be like, oh yeah, this it makes this. I can read the sound again, and
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's a great way to learn.
And I guess also, if you record the same species at different times and different places, you can compare them. And I
Oh
guess
yeah,
if and they should be the same essentially, shouldn't they? Depending, I know there's different like subspecies that have different calls or geographic
yeah.
distribution that has. That's a thing, isn't it? With
That's actually it's interesting you picked up on that. So one of the it's a pet project, let's say.
Oh yeah,
Is little wattlebirds.
oh yeah.
So
I
little
love little
what?
wild birds. Love them to bits.
Yeah, yeah, and this was something I just started noticing. Okay, actually, one of the things I love about eBird is you can just eBird anywhere,
Yeah.
and it forces you to like count little wattlebirds or pay attention to little wattle birds no matter where you are. Like, like I see them, like there's heaps of them in my garden all the time, and you still have to go. I have to go like 3 streets down, and I'm just making a list there, and I still have to look at them and count them again, and so on and so forth. But I picked up on like sort of, for example, with little wattle birds that they make different calls. At least here, 20 kilometers away, the little wattle bird seems to make completely different, has a different dialect, so to say.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I think you can pick out similarities. I mean, it's similar enough that you wouldn't really mistake it for anything else. But
Yeah.
you can tell like this individual doesn't come from the group of these individuals here,
Wow.
and so on.
And the key word you use there is dialects
Yeah,
because that's the analog for us as humans, isn't it? Like
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
different
yeah,
accents. It's like a
yeah.
so do birds of the same species have different accents?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think any birder who's keen with bird calls in general would notice that um, a super fairient, for example, may have a different number of trills in their song in one place, and just a different type or a different number of trills in a different place.
Uh-huh.
And um, whether they'll never mistake the species, but but they can pick up on the differences, whether it's individuals, may depend on how sedentary the species is, or it's just a different, like different individuals within the same species might have a different call or different quality to it, or it's different populations, because these species only move around so much.
Yeah.
And once you go from Devonport to Launceston to Hobart to Melbourne, it's the same species, just makes a slightly different call, which is probably a dialect.
Yes, and the best way to discern those differences are by looking at the spectrogram, I imagine.
I think the spectrogram is one way to do it, but often just by ear. I think the human ear is amazing in how good it is at picking out, just differences in sound. Like, I think I cannot speak for other animals' ears because I wouldn't know. But I think the human ear is amazing, that we can tell individuals of other humans by their voices.
Yes.
And so I think I think you don't even have to be recording birds to know or to gauge that there might be a difference in.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And something comes to mind as well is that its sound is often, maybe not often, but in many cases, when two very similar species look very similar.
Oh yeah.
Visually, but they make completely different sounds. That's fascinating to me,
Absolutely.
And often that's the only way in those cases that you can make an ID is if it's got a call, we've got to hear it.
Yeah. I suppose there's not too many examples in Australia. Like, I guess you have the grass wrens and things, but you have cryptic species. Species that look the same to the eye until you take a blood sample and you realize, they've got different DNA. But very often, one of the first clues that you get to the species that looks the same, but probably shouldn't be the same, maybe because of a biogeographical barrier or something, is that they have different sounds.
Yeah.
And like, at least in India, actually, I guess we never really got around to how I, started with bird sounds. One of the major reasons was I got into sound recording was to tell apart different warblers in particular. So we get a lot of reed warblers in India, Acrocephalus genus, coming down from various places in the winter when they're not singing and they've got just chuck, chuck. I mean, what to the human ear just sound like a chuck or a chuck.
Yeah.
And kind of sounds, but they're all different.
Wow. Even those small insignificant calls are different.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Just the length could be two notes hidden into one sound, and you pick those up, and and a lot of these species that otherwise look precisely the same are could be impossible to tell unless you have the bird in hand and you can measure the bill length and stuff like that. Become remarkably easy once you get onto the call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible. Let's wrap up the bird sound section. There's still a couple of questions that I really want to ask you. One of which is, so the most conducive habitat type to record bird sounds in, and so it's a two-part question. What's that? What's the best one, like best habitat type to get the best sounds, and then what's your favorite habitat type to record sounds in?
Oh, that's a great question. Best habitat type. As far away from a highway or an airport as possible. Really, absolutely any habitat. I love. I actually really love Tasmania for sometimes not having that much invertebrates calling and things like that. It means you get really crisp bird sounds recordings. Whereas you could be in a tropical rainforest, and no matter how close you are to a bird, there's just so much background sound also, with insects and other birds and things. That every recording has noise to it. So
like that's the grey background, isn't it?
Yeah. Cicadas and crickets and things, But in saying that, like, sometimes I love that in my recordings. I love having that atmospheric vibe to it. And but yeah, I think being away from, I'm not a big fan of anthropogenic sounds.
Yes.
I think human sounds, are the only sounds I really don't want to record. Like, and not human sounds as in our voices, as in just cars driving by or planes flying and horns and things.
Yes. I used to live in Santiago in Chile, one of
Oh
a
yeah,
huge city, and I did a lot of my sounds are from there, and it's amazing. Even in a park, when
yeah,
you feel that you're surrounded by nature, to an extent, you're
yeah,
still in a
yeah,
big city, but as soon as you record a sound and then listen to it again and look at the spectrogram, you can hear buses,
yeah, yeah.
ambulance sirens, airplanes,
Absolutely.
and they're so. That's the amazing thing about sound, is that you can have all of that in one place. But when you're doing urban birding,
Yeah,
that's an urban audio bird recordings.
yeah.
That's like a big hurdle, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think so I in my suburb, for example, I learned to work around it. Like I know when people are mowing their lawns, and you become and actually when you're normally birding, you wouldn't even care, and and now I'm just really careful about like when do people come out and mow their lawns,
Yeah.
or like even heat pumps running on low, they have this low
Yes.
all the time,
Yeah.
and you become really attuned to these anthropogenic sounds that you're like, oh, okay, must get out at this time and I can avoid this sound, and and so on and so forth. I'm very familiar with all the garbage truck runs in Devonport, for example, and those sorts of things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it, and Yeah, so I think for just bird sound recording, being away from human environment sounds,
Yes, that's
that's
good.
the job for me.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, what was your other question?
Yeah, it ties into what you were just saying. Is like these tips. Any advice or tips for birders who want to start recording bird sounds more seriously? What would be the
Yeah,
starting point for that?
I guess the starting point is just I think go out and start recording. I think very often I myself, like, I'm guilty of it. I get bogged down with like, oh, when I'm around people I wouldn't record. But just start. I think there just needs to be a starting point, and you'll figure out what kind of level of noise around you you're comfortable with, and you find your own sweet spot. Like now I used to get really uncomfortable in Tassie initially because of all the wind
Oh
all the
yeah,
time. But
yeah.
I've become really good at sheltering myself, finding the right coastal sea wattle for them. I'm like, oh yeah, if I'm behind this sea box, I'm actually making sounds as good as I would without wind.
Mm-hmm.
Or and you just start working around those ways. And I'm definitely better on people as well. I'll excuse myself for a couple of minutes and
Oh really?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the only challenge, I'm yet to sort of really work around is, of course, there's large groups and completely unavoidable stuff. Is recording sounds on a pelagic because
Wow.
there's
Yeah.
the motor of the boat
Yeah.
and the excitement of everybody around you.
Yeah. Have you done
Like
that before? Have you recorded bird sounds from a
oh yeah,
pelagic?
yeah, yeah,
You have.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
I've got a few wandering albatross, shy albatross kind of sounds, but you need to be just constantly pointing at something like Cape petrels often make a cat kind of sound and stuff like that. When they're scobbling and over like something. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
haven't yet figured it out, but I'm sure I'll get there someday. Also,
Wow.
keeping my gear waterproof is another one.
Yeah.
But
You must be the only one on those pelagics to have that big dish. Do you have the big dish
no,
one?
I don't carry that. I don't carry. I don't think there's enough space on the boat to be taking it up with that thing. I have tried carrying like the small shotgun mics,
Yeah.
and things. But yeah, just the opportunities to get them out, and also because I'm so focused on sometimes just photographing the bird for ID
Oh yes.
and
Yes.
stuff like that. Like
Yes.
it's hard.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, my advice to people who are just getting out there is use your phone, use your camera, use whatever you have in your hand, and start doing it. I think that's just the first step is to just start recording it, and start putting it out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll find your happy medium, your happy place, and hopefully you'll get the bug hard enough that you want to graduate to more gear
Yeah.
and actually seeking out recordings as opposed to just recording incidentally or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, just get into it.
Well, I hope this episode is going to generate a new number of bird sound recorders, because it's
Yeah.
when you look at the number of photos online of birds
Yeah.
and even videos,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
number of those media formats are so much higher than audio recordings for some reason. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even videos is really low, but I
Mm.
suppose videos are just hard to because they're so massive and
Yeah, storage. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, storage is a big issue with videos. But
Mm.
I would love to take more videos. It's just that I just with the camera and uh, I know if I get into it, it'll just take up so much of my time.
Yeah, yeah. There's only so many hours in the day. Hey,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
eternal
yeah.
problem. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
but yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's something to be said for both video and audio, and they're very similar in many ways, I think.
Yeah, because they capture
Um,
they capture time as well as other things, whereas a
that's
photo
that's
is
right.
is just an instant.
That's right. That's right.
So there's value in that scientifically as well as aesthetically. But um, let's move on maybe now, Ramit, to I'd like to ask you maybe about the projects that you're involved in, the bird monitoring and public engagement, if you'd like to chat about that.
Yeah, sure. So not a whole lot
Mm.
anymore, but so I used to work with Bird Count India, an organization that actually sort of sort of is the host of eBird India.
Mm.
That was my introduction to a lot of eBirds ins and outs,
Yeah.
so to say. But before that, also sort of I worked in the place I went to uni at, and I mentioned how there weren't any other birders around. Um,
Mm.
set up a bird club, and one of the things that's really popular in India is also atlases, so bird atlases.
Yeah.
And so just a lot of regular monitoring of places, whether they're hotspots or not. Like,
Mm.
just
Mm-hmm.
divide a place into grids. You go out, you see how the grid's doing, what the diversity is like, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And just sort of, it's a great way of engaging people in all walks of life. Because very often you're only trying to look at common birds as opposed to all birds. Um, you know, um, Seeing what tailor birds and
Mm.
Prinia, like in the Indian context, sorry,
Yeah.
what a common bird would be doing, as
Yeah.
opposed to um, just looking at the number of species and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think, sorry for sounding so incoherent here. I'm just trying to sort of bring it all together. But I think what used to be the defining philosophy behind that is keeping common birds common.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I think a lot of that, at least in India, is really popular now. I think we've had that experience with vultures in India, where they were amongst the most numerous raptors in the world. You
Uh-huh.
literally had over 1 million vultures in India at a point. And then there was this drug called diclofenac that was used as a painkiller in dairy cows.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
dairy cows, of course, is what they would often scavenge upon once they would be put out.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
carcasses were put out, and I think that drug caused some liver-based issues in vultures and caused them to die off pretty rapidly. And so, from being literally the most, I think the white-rumped vulture, that particular species, from being the most abundant raptor in the world
Yeah.
as of the 1980s. There's a few hundred left in the wild now, and that decline
Wow.
happened over a period of 10 years.
Wow.
And nobody imagined that could happen to a bird that common.
Hmm.
Like when this was before my time really in this world, but my mom and dad just grew up around vultures, and
Yeah.
I would be lucky now to see one in a year if I lived in India.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so a lot of birders tend to be driven by the idea of monitoring common birds, because those are often it's very easy to ignore a decline
Uh-huh.
until it's too late.
Yeah, yeah.
um, and B, because you don't have to be an amazing birder to, like, in the sense of being able to identify everything.
Yeah, yeah.
You just have to know how to identify the common birds,
Uh-huh.
and to be able to take part in a lot of these bird surveys. So I think the backyard bird count in Australia is a great analogy for something similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where
With a
you have,
conservation focus, like the conservation of
yeah,
the common birds is
yeah, absolutely. and
mm.
and I mean, I think again we spoke about birding and the accessibility part of it, and it's some of the, like, when I often think about who's a good birder, let's say. And I've met, like, I used to work with these ladies who would bird from their kitchen, right? Like, we're part of these projects, these small monitoring projects. So in short, there were a bunch of similar small monitoring projects in Manipal, so the town where I studied, which we had set up and hoping to sort of get an idea of what's happening. And you had all um, these, not sure what the politically correct term is, but basically women who would work at homes and look out the kitchen windows and just document what they were seeing.
Yeah.
And they were familiar with the behavioral aspects of these birds, like people who've been birding for like decades wouldn't know about these things,
Wow.
and
Interesting. Yeah.
and um and so they would just, yeah, so it's a great way of sort of engaging people in various walks of life to just see, um if you're out on like people who are out just doing a school run, like just walking their kids to school and back, would make a bird list. And so you have an idea of what birds are doing in places that would otherwise completely be missed by scientific research, because you're not going to have a PhD student or a postdoc looking at birds from Smith Street to the school next door. What's happening to those birds based on
Yeah.
what people are doing in their gardens and
Yeah.
things. And
Yeah.
so you would have these people involved, just collecting metadata,
Mm.
and birds, like, oh, sprayed pesticide in my garden, and then this is what happened to the birds, and so on and so forth. Or in
Yeah.
this season I put a rose bush, and this is what
Yeah.
happens to the birds and things.
Yeah.
And so they just really small things. And the idea was just to get a lot of data out of it, and just and see any emerging patterns and stuff like that. And
Data is like so important. Data collection,
yeah,
good quality data is the key to everything, really.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest sort of win was just that people got to love the birds they saw, on a day-to-day basis, and question things like, why did this bird go away? So, for example, one example, I wasn't involved in this project, although I was part of a team that ran it as such. But there's this thing called the Mysore. Mysore is a city in South India near Bangalore, and they had a Mysore bird atlas. So one of the resident bird species in India, considered resident, is a black drongo.
Oh
So
yeah.
they ran this atlas, divided the city into like 100 grids,
Yeah.
went and sampled in those grids four
Are these
times in a
exactly
year.
square grids?
Exactly square
Yeah.
grids, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I think 1.2 kilometers by 1.2 kilometers. And they went out every Sunday, four times in a year, looked at all the birds, and realized that actually black drongos are not resident. There's no literature at all, like heaps of field guides, all of them show the green color as a sedentary species, and realize that actually black drongos migrate every winter. They just disappear
Wow.
from the city.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't know where they go actually, but at least within the confines of that city, they just completely disappear, and then back to becoming the most common bird in the summer months.
Wow.
Um,
Incredible.
yeah, we had
Incredible.
something similar with black kites in Manipal. We just realized, hang on, in the monsoon, they just completely disappear. And so you have these emerging patterns about birds that are really common that you had no idea.
Yeah.
You wouldn't really look into these things until you got people engaged en masse.
Yes, that's exactly right. Because you need the numbers. You need the numbers of the population because that's what the data requires is a huge number of observers
Yeah,
to have that. That's so interesting. That's
yeah,
so interesting. It just shows that there's so much more to learn.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just if a lot of the public, I think an eBird is such a fantastic tool to keep people engaged that
Mm.
way,
Mm.
and see the ins and outs. And so you had this one city do it, and suddenly you have a lot of people, let's say on eBird, looking at black drongos and trying to make complete lists with black drongos on the list. And now you have an idea of like, oh, they're going out of this city, but they're actually not. They are resident. They're not migratory, but they seem to just go out into the fields
Uh-huh.
100 kilometers away,
Yes.
and then they
Okay.
come back. So they have these small migratory patterns.
Uh-huh.
But how that informs conservation decisions later on, like, might be critical, for example. And so you have just this buildup of knowledge and
Yeah.
of and about patterns in birds, whether it's their behavior or movement and abundance, that can really inform people who are impacting the survival of the species.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think birders know this instinctively, you know, that regular consistent data collection and observation leads to interesting results regardless of what you're looking at. Because I remember when we first moved to Australia in 2011, like 12 years ago now, we lived in southeast Melbourne near Berwick, Upper Beaconsfield, Pakenham area, and we had the house in the hills, and I remember looking out the kitchen window, and we used to put seeds out, you know, then the common bronzewings would come in, rainbow lorikeets, crimson rosellas, all that, and I started compiling like a spreadsheet of all of the birds that I would see from the kitchen window. And then, you know, I was still, how old was I? I wasn't old enough to have complete expertise on exactly what I was doing scientifically, but it was that drive to document everything, you know, and try and discern trends, you know. That's so fascinating to do all the time.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's and there's a lot to be said for that. Because these trends, you know, we're so familiar with like a bar-tailed godwit that goes from Alaska to New Zealand and Tassie and the east coast of Australia. But we may know so little about the movements of a crimson rosella. You know, like we probably know far more about the godwit than we know about what you know, crimson rosella does in Berwick and where it goes from there.
Absolutely. And then we can get into all the satellite tagging stuff, you know, but that's a whole other world for sure.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time, Ramit. So let's close the episode.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into one of the fan favorite questions. So what's your favorite bird? Yeah. And then what's maybe the favorite bird for you to record if it's a different bird?
Okay, cool. Actually, the questions tied together and is so I I really miss this about Australia, by the way. So in India, there's a lot of species of pipits. They all look alike. One of the best ways to tell them apart is by call. So pipits are my favorite group of birds.
Really?
Pipit. I just loved it. I loved how like they're brown and sort of just, there's not a lot to say about them if you're trying to describe them to like somebody who's not a birder. But when you look closely, they tend to have these beautiful streakings on the flanks, like a bit of rufous smudge that comes down. Streaking, you know, some have laurel stripes, some don't. They're just a really good-looking bird actually when you see them up close. And when you have different types of pipits, they can look kind of similar, but they all have different things about them. And one of the best ways to tell them apart is by call. And so I would record pipits all the time. It was one of my actually initial driver towards recording bird sounds was pipits.
Yes, interesting.
Of course, So in a nutshell, my answer is pipits and recording pipits. So it's the same thing. In Australia, of course, just the one species of pipit, really, at least in Tassie. So it's a bit not as exciting, perhaps, for me. But my favorite bird in Tasmania would probably be I love the scrub-tipped.
Oh yeah,
it's so I'm a big fan of birds also found in niche or being very niche environments, like sort of like or having like their own sort of being found, not being generalists. I mean, I just really like birds that are specialized that way, and so the scrub-tipped's like a rainforest specialist, and it's such a weird bird. It has this like weird nuthatch like behavior. I love nuthatches too, but this one like is just creeps up along barks and goes digging, like, you know, rips out barks, and it looks like a regular passerine from photos, and then when you watch it at work, it's just got this incredible, just this nice habit. Like, it's just got habits that for some reason, at least to me, I was never relate to it by looking at it from a photograph. And so it's a bird I love watching. Again, very colorful in many different ways. Like I'm actually colorblind, so colorful is probably not a great way of putting it, but it's got lots of interesting patterns to it that I think makes it a really beautiful bird. And it's got vocalizations that are often so high-pitched that I can't hear until I see it in a spectrogram.
Wow.
And it's got this very beautiful song that is also so unlike a lot of Tasmanian endemics. Like, they don't have a very complex song, but the scripted song is one that's really obvious, identifiable, and is
Yeah,
like it's complex enough to make it like, oh wow, like I'm in great habitat. Like if I hear a scripted, I just feel like, oh wow, I'm in wonderful habitat, and it's just a great bird to see.
for sure.
Because
Oh, I'd love to see one. I've never seen one, of course, not having gone to Tasmania, but and that ties in also to the dream bird. Like, is there a bird that you haven't seen that you'd be like, oh, I'd love to see that one day?
yeah, there's heaps. Um, I guess there's genuine heaps. Like there's so many birds I would love to see. Um, if I had to pick one at random, it would probably be maybe the Andean cock of the rock or something.
Oh yeah,
It just looks super cool.
yes,
It's a really good looking bird.
oh,
I
absolutely,
just you can't quite tell where the bill is and things. And I would love to see it in life and just see how it actually does what it does. Like with the legs and things like that.
yes. They're incredible, man. They're
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
Those ones, yeah.
Um, and yeah, maybe something I love grouse also, so capercaillies and things, and
Yeah.
something like that would be.
There's so many bird families that we don't get in Australia that are amazing. And again, I spoke about this with James in the last episode. Is woodpeckers and hummingbirds, for
Oh
example,
yeah,
not a
yeah,
single
absolutely,
species.
absolutely.
Which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
which is kind of a shame in a way, but we have such amazing birds here to
That's right.
compensate.
Yeah, yeah. We get so many other amazing families and things that to busy ourselves with, I suppose.
For
Yeah,
sure, for
yeah.
sure, for sure. And the last question that I had for you on the list, and feel free to expand on this one, is do you have a dream destination that you would go birding in, and maybe for sound recording as well, if you have a dream place to go to for that?
Yeah. Okay. So a dream destination, um, there's anywhere I haven't been to
Uh-huh.
would be great.
Yes,
And
I share that sentiment. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think like it's hard to pick between it's just so many places really, like in Africa, South America, and subantarctic islands,
Oh yeah.
all of those. But I think when I really think about it, I okay, I one of the I list. I'm a big lister. Like I have a list for my garden, for my dog walk, for my LGA, all LGAs in Tassie, Australia, India, oh, everything. Okay, like just you name it, and I have a list for it. And but I do really care about my Indian list.
Mm.
And so there's places in India I haven't been to that would greatly add to my Indian list. In
Yeah.
particular, so the eastern part of India, bordering um, Myanmar
Oh yeah.
and Bangladesh. Those
Yeah.
those areas I haven't spent that much time in, and there's some fantastic species to be had there.
Yeah.
Um, Similarly, as an Indian citizen, I've never been able to go to Pakistan,
Oh
which
wow.
because of our political differences. I recently got my Australian citizenship, and I'm hoping that allows me to visit Pakistan and actually see a couple of the birds over there that are otherwise very hard to get in India.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd love to just sort of, I think I would love to go to those places. And similarly, so I do keep a sound recording list as well. I in terms of recording bird sounds, again, I've my focus has really shifted off late to trying recording things that you wouldn't record otherwise, like great cormorants and
Yeah.
birds that you don't think make sounds.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah, yeah, stuff like that.
Wow.
So again, any bird that I haven't recorded before is a great bird to record. In terms of a pure birding perspective, it would probably be again. I would love to record more birds in India, but also just I think I think any bird really that I get really excited by the thought of recording ducks, cormorants, shorebirds. All of these birds that we don't really associate as birds
Yeah.
with sounds.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Because we've never heard them. Maybe,
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
example.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
pelagics. Again, I think I love the idea of recording a storm petrel at sea, for example. Like, what does it say? It must say something.
Yeah. And I guess
Yeah.
one way to kind of hone in your target list is to, because I'm sure there's countless bird species that have no sound recorded to them at all.
Oh
There's
yeah.
no. It's insane because it's the case for photos. Definitely, that
Yeah. Yeah.
some very rare and extremely cryptic birds don't even have a photograph of them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Although there are probably not too many of those left.
Yeah.
But for sounds, it's like there's so much potential to get the first recording of a species.
There's quite a few. Yeah. I think there's
Can you
been
think of one in Australia?
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
yeah.
I know. I think the freckled duck was one of my first.
Yeah.
I got really good recordings. I mean, good in the sense of you could tell it was a bird, and so they had this like low roaring sounds, like a
Wow, really?
yeah, which I mean, it sounds nothing like a freckled duck when you think about what a freckled duck would sound like.
Yeah.
And I think those were one of the first recordings of a freckled duck, at least put in the public uh,
Yeah.
database. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, epic. Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
it serves as a message to listeners and viewers. Get up your microphones, record the sounds you hear and upload them, send them to Ramit so he can tell you what it is and give you more tips.
Or just put them up on Xenocanto later. Yeah. I think something like that would be amazing. Just have the community engaged also with something like that. Yeah.
And there's a really good Facebook group. I think I haven't been on Facebook. I don't really go on it as much now, but is Australian Bird Calls and Sounds ID or something like that?
Yeah,
There's groups that can help with that too, right?
Yeah, I'm also not, unfortunately, very active on Facebook, but yeah, I do know of the group. Yeah, and I'm sure there's there used to be a really good forum actually for Australian bioacoustics. I'm not sure how active it is now, but I used I used it very often for knowing what gear to get and stuff, like many years ago.
Yeah, the technical stuff. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's wrap up the episode. It's been an absolute joy to talk about this with you, Ramit. Like it's such an interesting aspect of birding, and you've been a pleasure. So thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Thomas. Yeah, it's been great.
All right. Hope to see you in the field someday when I get to Tasmania eventually.
yeah, or vice versa when I'm in Cairns. I'll definitely get in touch. Yeah.
Please do hit me up, and we'll sort something out for sure.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Cheers.
mate. Bye.
See ya.